It was the dead of night when my phone buzzed. The sound pulled me out of that strange liminal space between sleep and wakefulness. I groggily picked it up, expecting a spam text or some late-night notification from social media, but it was worse.
It was a call. From an unknown number.
Who the hell is calling me at 2 a.m.? I muttered under my breath. A heavy pause before I answered. I could have just let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me.
Hello.
For a moment, there was only silence, static crackling like a bad radio signal. Then, a voice, gruff, urgent, barked on the other end. Is this the owner of the property at 1462 Carver Street?
My blood froze.
That was my address.
Who is this?
I demanded, now fully awake. My heart thudded in my chest like a bass drum. This is Officer Jameson, with the City Police Department, the voice replied, though there was something off about his tone. There's been a report of unusual activity at your property. Are you home right now? I bolted upright, already on edge. I hadn't noticed anything strange, but the house was quiet. Too quiet. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I'm home, yeah, but I haven't seen or heard anything. The officer's voice took on an edge of warning, almost as if he was trying to keep me calm but knew something terrible was waiting to unfold.
Stay inside. Lock your doors.
Someone will be there shortly. Do not, I repeat, do not go outside. Before I could ask for more details, the call cut off. I was left gripping the phone, staring into the darkness of my living room, wondering what the hell was going on. I got up, checked the locks on the front door, and peeked through the peephole. The street was deserted, bathed in the dim glow of the streetlights. But something felt wrong. I don't know how to describe it, the air just felt heavier, as if I was waiting for something to happen. Another buzz, this time from my phone again.
Another call. Unknown number. For a split second, I hesitated. Maybe it was the cop again.
Maybe he had more information. Maybe I shouldn't answer at all. Against my better judgment, I slid my thumb across the screen. The voice on the other end wasn't the officer's. This time, it was barely a whisper, just a hissing sound that slithered through the speaker. And then, a single word distorted and slow, as if it had traveled a long, long way to reach me.
Come outside.
I dropped the phone, my heart racing now. What the hell was going on? I backed away from the phone like it had burned me, my pulse pounding in my ears. For a long moment, I just stood there, frozen, eyes darting toward the front door. The whisper echoed in my head, come outside.
Screw that.
I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet by the door, gripping it tightly in my trembling hands. My mind raced. Was someone out there, messing with me?
It didn't make sense.
It couldn't be a coincidence that the cop had called me just before that voice whispered through the phone. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door, 3 hard raps that rattled the wood. I nearly jumped out of my skin.
Police. Open up.
I wasn't about to just throw the door open. I pressed my eye against the peephole. Sure enough, there was a cop on the porch, dressed in full uniform, hand resting on the holster of his gun. His face was hard to see clearly in the dim light, but something about him seemed off. I couldn't explain it, but a sick feeling twisted in my gut. I need to see your badge. I shouted through the door, gripping the bat tighter. There was a long pause, and then the cop said, badge? What the hell's wrong with you, son?
Open the door.
This is an emergency. His voice was different now, less official, more irritated. It was subtle, but there was a slight slur in his words, like he was trying too hard to sound professional. Show me your badge, I repeated, my voice shaking. I stepped back from the door. There was no way I was opening it.
The knocking stopped.
For a few seconds, everything was silent, and I thought maybe he'd gone. Maybe I'd been paranoid, imagining things. Then slowly, the knocking started again, softer this time, almost gentle. Come on, the voice whispered, low and sickeningly sweet. Come outside, it's safe. You can trust me. That's when I heard it. A wet, scraping sound, like something being dragged across the porch. The noise sent a chill down my spine.
I looked through the peephole again.
The officer wasn't there anymore. Instead, something long and dark was slithering just outside my door. A shadow, slick and oily, like a snake crawling across the ground. It moved too fast, shifting in and out of view as it twisted around the porch. I took a step back, heart hammering in my chest. The bat felt useless in my hands. My instinct screamed to get as far away from the door as possible, but my legs felt like lead. The scraping sound grew louder, more frantic. Whatever was out there was trying to get in. Suddenly, the front window rattled, like someone or something was tapping on the glass. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't see anything through the blinds, But I didn't need to.
I could feel it. The thing wasn't human.
I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the coffee table, my mind racing.
This wasn't normal. This wasn't some prank.
Whatever was out there wanted me to open the door, to let it inside.
And then, the voice came again.
But this time, it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the house. Come out, wherever you are. I spun around, the bat raised. The living room was empty, but the voice, that horrible raspy whisper, echoed from the shadows, curling around me like a noose tightening. I had to get out.
Now.
Without thinking, I bolted toward the kitchen, my shoes slapping against the hardwood floor. I could feel the thing's presence behind me, crawling closer, unseen but all too real. The air grew thick, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I reached the back door, fumbling with the lock, my fingers slick with sweat. The door flew open, and I stumbled into the backyard, gasping for air. But the relief was short-lived. Standing at the edge of the yard, barely illuminated by the faint glow of the porch light, was the cop. His uniform was torn, hanging loosely on a twisted, unnatural frame. His eyes, empty black pits, stared straight at me. And behind him, slithering out of the darkness, was that thing.
The shadow.
It crawled across the grass, its form shifting, growing, feeding off the night. I froze, paralyzed by fear. The cop, or whatever the hell he was, grinned, his teeth unnaturally sharp, glistening like knives in the dim light. He took a step toward me, his voice dripping with malice. Nowhere to run. You should have opened the door. My body screamed at me to move, but I couldn't. The cop, or the thing wearing his skin, took another slow, deliberate step forward. His grin stretched impossibly wide, splitting his face, as though his skin was too tight to hold whatever was lurking underneath. That shadow, that thing, was writhing across the grass, its black tendrils twisting and slithering like smoke. It crept closer, feeding on the darkness, growing larger as it moved toward me. Then, the cop spoke again, his voice a guttural rasp. No one's coming to help you. It's just you and me, kid. I snapped out of my paralysis, my survival instinct finally kicking in. Without thinking, I turned and bolted. The backyard gate was too far, but the shed, there was an old shed at the side of the yard, barely visible in the moonlight. I sprinted for it, adrenaline surging through my veins. Behind me, I could hear the cop's heavy dragging footsteps, followed by the sickening slither of the shadow. I reached the shed, yanked open the door, and slammed it shut behind me, locking it with the flimsy latch. My chest heaved, and I backed away from the door, clutching the bat like it could somehow save me. The shed was small, cluttered with old tools and rusted equipment. There wasn't much space to move, but at least it was a barrier.
For now.
Outside, I heard the cop stop just beyond the door. His raspy breathing was loud, unnatural, like something struggling to mimic human sounds. I held my breath, pressing my back against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. Then, the scratching started. Slow, deliberate scraping against the wood. Long black claws, or whatever they were, dragged across the surface, making a noise that set my teeth on edge.
Come on, the voice whispered, coaxing.
Let's make this quick.
No one will know.
You'll just disappear. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to drown out the sound, trying to convince myself this wasn't happening. But the scratching grew louder, more insistent. Suddenly, the shed door rattled violently, like something was slamming into it with inhuman strength. The latch strained, the old wood groaned. I knew it wouldn't hold for long. The cop's voice was deeper now, angrier. You can't hide forever. I'll find you. A crack. The wood splintered near the lock. My heart raced, my hands slick with sweat as I gripped the bat tighter. This was it. This was how I was going to die. But then, sirens. The wail of police sirens cut through the night, distant at first, but growing louder, closer. Flashing red and blue lights reflected off the shed's grimy window. The door rattled again, harder this time, but the cop outside hesitated. The scratching stopped. The real police were here. I scrambled to the window, peeking out just as two squad cars screeched to a stop in front of my house. Uniformed officers jumped out, their flashlights sweeping over the yard. Relief washed over me, but only for a second. Because the cop outside my shed wasn't backing down. The slithering shadow twisted up, coiling like a snake ready to strike. Then it lashed out, crashing against the shed, making the entire structure shudder. I let out a scream, instinctively raising the bat, though I knew it was useless. But just before the door gave way, the thing stopped. I dared to peek through the crack in the door. The shadow was retreating, slinking back into the darkness. And the cop, his form began to distort, his face twisting, mouth stretching unnaturally wide. He let out a low, guttural growl, one that echoed like a distant thunderstorm. He glared at the approaching police officers, and for a moment, it looked like he was going to attack them. But then, with a final snarl, he stepped back into the shadows. His body seemed to melt into the darkness, blending with that horrible shadow creature until both were gone. Just like that. Vanished. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The shed door flew open, but this time it was the real police. A uniformed officer pointed his flashlight in my face. "Are you okay?" he shouted, his voice stern but concerned. I could only nod, too shaken to speak. He pulled me out of the shed and back into the yard, where more officers were combing the area, searching the shadows for any sign of the thing that had been hunting me.
But it was gone. Just gone.
"What the hell happened here?" one of the officers asked me, but I couldn't find the words to explain. What could I say? That something inhuman, had tried to lure me outside? That it wore the skin of a cop and had a shadow for a partner? Instead, I just shook my head. I don't know, I stammered. I don't know what that was. The officers exchanged glances, clearly not convinced, but they didn't push me further. One of them led me toward the house, telling me to stay somewhere safe for the night. I was too exhausted to argue. My body felt numb, my mind spinning. As I looked back at the yard, half expecting to see that shadow slithering back out from the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't gone. Not for good. It was still out there, somewhere, waiting. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house, every shift of the wind outside, made my heart jump. Even though the police had promised to patrol the area, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Something was lurking just beyond my line of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. Morning came, but it didn't bring any comfort. The sunlight felt pale and weak, barely enough to chase away the terror that had wrapped itself around me like a shroud. I didn't leave the house, not even to get the mail. Instead, I sat in my living room, staring at the door, half expecting it to rattle again, for that voice to come slithering through the cracks. I thought about calling someone, maybe my brother or an old friend from college, but what would I say? That I had been hunted by something that wasn't human? They'd think I'd lost my mind. Hell, I was starting to think I had. By noon, I was pacing the living room, trying to shake off the lingering dread, when my phone buzzed. I froze, staring at it for what felt like an eternity before I picked it up.
Another unknown number.
I almost didn't answer. My thumb hovered over the reject button, but something, maybe curiosity, maybe fear, compelled me to swipe right and hold the phone to my ear.
"Hello,"
I said, my voice barely a whisper. There was silence on the other end. Not static this time, just pure, deafening silence.
My heart sank.
I knew what was coming.
And then it spoke.
"You got away," the voice rasped, distorted like it was coming from deep underwater. "But you can't hide forever. We'll meet again, soon." I dropped the phone like it was a live wire, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The call ended, but the words hung in the air like a curse. "We'll meet again.
Soon."
I spent the rest of the day in a fog, unable to focus, unable to do anything except stare out the windows, watching for signs of movement, for any shadow that lingered too long. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out of the house. Staying there, alone, waiting for whatever was coming, was driving me insane. I grabbed my keys and headed for the car, half expecting the shadow to spring out from the darkness the moment I stepped outside. But nothing happened. The world seemed painfully normal, indifferent to the nightmare I'd lived through. I drove aimlessly for a while, not sure where I was going, just wanting to be anywhere but home. Eventually, I ended up at a diner on the outskirts of town, one of those places that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. It was quiet inside, a few truckers scattered across the booths, sipping coffee and staring blankly at their plates. I ordered a cup of coffee, trying to steady my nerves, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Every time someone walked through the door, I flinched, half expecting to see that twisted cop or worse, the shadow creeping across the floor. After about an hour of pretending to be normal, I decided it was time to head back. I couldn't avoid it forever. If whatever it was wanted me, it would find me, no matter where I went. But as I stood up to leave, something caught my eye. On the other side of the diner, sitting alone in a corner booth, was a man. He was dressed in a dark hoodie, hunched over a cup of coffee, his face obscured by the shadow of his hood. But there was something about him, something familiar. My blood ran cold. He turned his head slightly, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of his face.
It was the cop.
Or at least, the thing that had worn his skin. Those empty, black eyes locked onto mine, and the corner of his mouth twisted into that same grotesque grin. I froze. He just stared at me, unblinking, as if waiting for me to make the next move. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. The other patrons hadn't noticed a thing. They were oblivious, trapped in their mundane conversations and meals.
But I knew.
I knew this wasn't over. I stumbled out of the diner, nearly tripping over my own feet in my rush to get back to the car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling as I unlocked the door and threw myself inside. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him following me.
But he wasn't.
The diner faded into the distance, swallowed by the night, and I drove in silence, my thoughts racing. I should have gone straight home, but something was pulling me in a different direction. I found myself driving back toward the outskirts of town, toward the one place I hadn't wanted to return to. 1462 Carver Street. My house stood there, as still and unassuming as it had the night before. But it felt different now. Darker. Like it was waiting for something. I parked the car and sat there for a long time, staring at the front door. I didn't want to go back inside, but I knew I had no choice. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to stop. It wasn't going to leave me alone until I faced it. With a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked up to the door. My hand hovered over the knob, hesitating.
Then I heard it.
A soft, rasping whisper, coming from the other side of the door.
Come inside.
I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The house was dark, but I didn't need the lights. I could feel it there, waiting in the shadows. I stepped inside, the door closing behind me with a soft click. And then, the voice spoke again, closer this time. I told you, we'd meet again.
I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of it. Not of the darkness.
I had been running for too long, and deep down, I knew the truth. There was no escaping it. There never had been. Whatever it was, it had been with me all along. Waiting. And now, it was here. I closed my eyes, and the darkness swallowed me whole.